Ahoy! New World Season 5 is so much bigger than we knew so far. This patch is going to be massive, it's going to affect pretty much everything in the game. There's no new OPR map yet, but there are plenty of other changes that make me wish that this would have been the Season 4 patch. If this was what was going on in Season 4, New World would be thriving right now. It is what it is, but I would say lean back, grab a cup of tea, coffee, whatever you're drinking. This is going to be a while to go through because there's tons and tons in here, and we are going to skip over the stuff that we already talked about yesterday because otherwise it would take even longer, and it's still going to be a lot. So first of all, we have all the basic announcements for PTR, all the new features that are coming in general. Again, this is all stuff we have already talked about beforehand. And then we have the new trials, all of the new artifacts. We have very interesting things in that regard as well. I will talk about those separately. I will probably do that tomorrow. We have the new upgraded combat system or upgrade animation system for that. We have mounts and OPR, storyline revision, native controller support. All of that stuff we've already talked about. And then we have so much more, which is going to affect the PvP side, the PvE side, the economy. So just a bit of everything really, or a lot of everything. Let's start here with the general changes. This is just very basic stuff for the most part that we don't need to go through in detail. Some spawn fixes, various other things that I'm not going to discuss. I'm only going to point out a few select ones that I think are really relevant. So for these you can just pause if you want to see anything specific. We have quest fixes, AI fixes, and expedition fixes, part 1 and part 2. One thing that is notable here is the global mutator introduced an 0.25 seconds delay between inflamed AoE filling up and the damage going out for improved reaction time, which could be nice, and some bosses not scaling their difficulty correctly. But the first really major change is Outpost Rush. So this one by itself is already going to be big. We had a very minor change to barrels in the last patch, which I thought was, a start, them trying out, testing the waters. And I already said that I would expect more changes in Season 5. I did not expect that we're going to get this many changes in Season 5. So structures will still exist, but they will be much less of an issue than beforehand. This begins with adding a 50% weakness for siege damage to fort gate doors, allowing siege weaponry, so powder kegs, to deal bonus damage to these structures, which makes sense in context of the barrels getting cheaper, so they're going to be more effective and they're cheaper now, so maybe they will actually be useful. Maybe there was a reason why they did what they did in the last patch. But in addition to that, they also reduced the strike and slash protection, absorption rather, for fort gates from the 10 and 20% to 0 for both, so that they're not reduced when attacking the gates, so they want melee to be able to push the gates a little bit more effectively compared to ranged where you have elemental or thrust damage most of the time. And then, the probably biggest change here is they increased the build and repair time for fort gate doors by 25% for the tier 2 gate and 50% for the tier 3 gate, reducing the strength of each repair tick. So this sounds like you would actually need double the amount of resources effectively if you want to get the same amount of repairs. But even if it's not the amount and just the time, it would already be massive because you will have a much harder time holding a door between the additional damage they're taking plus the siege damage they may be taking in some situations if you're busy repairing in that very moment, because you're gonna spend more time actually repairing the door and less time maybe going up in between and bombing a few kegs. So I think these changes are good. We can definitely wait out and see what happens after that, if that is enough, if that is effective. But for now, I think this is exactly the approach that they needed to take, and I think most people will be very happy with that. The next change, I think a lot of people will be happy with, but I don't think everyone will be happy with, but it's one they kind of announced, and it's pretty drastic overall. They're doing the equip load changes. So medium is now the new baseline with damage and crowd control durations, outgoing healing and block stability values all being adjusted to 0 across the board. That is your standard. Heavy is different. Heavy is a 20% decrease to incoming CC status effect durations. So this is not freedom, this is not directly like freedom, and it's kind of a bit counterintuitive and so forth that you don't want to stack this with too much freedom. If you want to get maximized efficiency, you can, because you still get the biggest reduction possible, but the value is, not additive. But you also get 15% block stability, so if you have a build that revolves around blocking to at least some degree, then there is value here. In return, you lose 15% damage. I'm assuming this is still going to be base damage, and 30% outgoing healing. It also increased threat generation from taunting gems and perks to account for the decrease in damage output, so tanking should be fairly easy and heavy. On the other hand, we have the light equip load, which has plus 15% damage and plus 30% outgoing healing. Trade-offs is the 15% block stability reduction and plus 10% incoming CC status effect durations. I think this is going to lead to some pretty funny outcome, where I think a lot of people will lean towards light. You have a very long distance roll, you have more damage, you have more healing if you're healing. So generally you have a lot of benefits, and block stability doesn't really matter in light because you're dodge rolling anyways. So I think light definitely has an advantage here overall right now. Obviously not everyone everywhere is always going to run light, but I do think there are many situations where it's beneficial. But then there's the 10% incoming CC duration that I think some players will abuse, and then there will be complaints from the light players that say like Sword and Shield is broken because they have such a long stun, which is affected by this, and like medium players may not be experiencing the same issue. So that's gonna be some funny discussion down the line, I think. What I am a bit surprised about, as far as I've seen so far when I glanced over all of this, is that there aren't more specific changes tied to the equip load for melee versus range, because they said they wanted to make life a little bit easier for melee schizo builds, for light equip builds. So not quite sure what's going on there. Maybe I missed it, maybe we'll get to it. But generally I don't think that's like a main focus of this patch so far. Maybe they just want to see the development after these changes in general first. But I do think that's something to be on the lookout for. Medium equip load also gets a new artifact that could make it more interesting, which gives you 20% health. So that's something some people might consider. So really there's a lot of potential things that could be going on. And I wouldn't rule out that some people will still run heavy as well, though I do expect the overall heavy population to go down quite heavily. We've already seen parts of that with the previous changes, and I think it's going to trend more in that direction. I don't know what the overall outcome of that will be, but I do think it's going to be interesting to see these meta shifts and see where things land after that. There is another change in here though that kind of affects equip load as well, which is this. Players now have limited rotation while dodging forwards or backwards. So that is going to affect mobility. It's interesting that sideways isn't mentioned here because that's technically the strongest dodge if you know how to do it right. I'm not even sure if that's going to have the same rotation limitations or not. But overall, that is something that will somewhat affect the equip load as well. We'll have to see how strong that really is. There's a bunch of other minor fixes here and everything. One thing that I want to point out here is the Bile Bomb pattern has been updated to include the outgoing healing reduction equal to half of the incoming healing. So that's going to make Bile Bomb a little bit more effective as well. I think this is especially relevant for wars. And we have some abilities that have multiple hits, where we now have more information about the cancel windows. There's also one here that is status effects that scale stat modifiers over time now behave correctly when the potency of the status effect is changed while it's active. So basically that doesn't snapshot as hard anymore and will adjust with other adjustments to your stats in that very moment. Quite a few pretty essential fixes. First one here is just fix an issue when accelerating trap would not apply bleed if only the first trap upgrade was unlocked. Fix an issue where several haste effects were not properly extended by the Alacrity and the Wing Shoes artifact. This is one that has been around forever, has been very frustrating, very glad that is being addressed. They also fixed an issue where the Bleed from Bleeding Sweep perk could not be extended past the base duration. Did not know this, but this is quite essential, I think, because that can often lead to quite a fair bit more damage. They fixed an issue where the Accelerate perk on Rune Glass Gems was not properly increasing damage while all abilities were on cooldown. Still not too sure if that's even worth using anyways, to be honest. Fixed an issue where Keenly Jagged perk could stack up to 3 times if applied via different sources. Understandable. Fixed an issue where the Retaliate perk on Jasper Runeglass Gem was not stacking. It was just stuck at 1 stack, so it was really not worth using in that way. So that was very annoying. Very glad they fixed that. Fixed an issue when feeling Maelstrom perk would not always trigger if a target was at a further distance or at a specific angle around the player. A lot of players were A lot of players were complaining about that, where they would use the ability and it would simply not apply the enfeebling effect. The number of equipped stacks for perk stacks for shields will now be displayed within the inventory screen, and change the text on refreshing toast to reflect that it works on all consumables. For the artifacts, they allow us twice as many quests now, we already talked about that, but they also fixed the wind shield so that it would work along the Blood Drinker's Ghoul's Harmony artifact perk, if that's a combination you're using. Pestilence apparently had an issue when using it with Lifestaff, so that should be fixed, and they fixed an issue where the status effect by Pestilence and Blinded Enchantment perk would not be reduced by Invigorated. I think that was because it's multiple effects at once. I think it was effectively dot reduction that allowed to reduce it on the initial PTR when I tested it at least. So yeah, that's now, I guess, separated into the debuff as well. Fixed an issue where the 350 strength attribute bonus was not applying to ranged ability damage. Obviously a very niche case, pretty much, I guess, for the fire staff. Other than that, you wouldn't really run strength on most of them. But anyways, we're moving on to the weapon changes, starting with Blunderbuss. Fix an issue where if a Blunderbuss grenade detonated at the precise moment it hit a wall, the split grenades would spawn behind the wall. Fair enough. Fix an issue where Clawshot root effect could be reduced to a low enough value that it would break the ability's functionality. So now instead, they're giving it a fixed duration that cannot be changed by modifiers, so it cannot be changed by any CC reduction or increase that there used to be. So now it's always going to be 0.7 seconds instead of the previous 1 second, but it's locked to that and cannot be lower than that, so it doesn't break. The claw shot can also now target a specific mobs and a specific encounter, but that's kind of whatever. The next change, however, very big. The bow gets a fixed where bow heavy attacks were sometimes being treated as light attacks, and by sometimes they pretty much mean almost always, because it was, I think, I'm almost under any circumstances. And this has impact on multiple things. First of all, this has an impact on the current bow builds, because it may mean that you may need to run more strength if you want to get the heavy attack bonus. And additionally, this has an impact on the new spear artifact, which procs with heavy attacks, which wouldn't work with the bow if the bow didn't count as a heavy attack, but now it does. So that artifact works with it now, which makes it more interesting for spear bow builds, which I think in itself is very cool. Not that I'm a fan of bows, but I like the synergy there. Fire staffs, trial by fire, could affect targets through gates and structures, that's fixed. Mana regen does not occur while flamethrower is active. Keep in mind we are getting more mana regen changes later down the road this year, so this might be in preparation for that. And then some visual fixes. With the Flail, they modified the radius of the area, or the AoE, for Better Together, the AoE healing. This will now vary based on the player's equip load, with light offering 5 meter radius, medium a 4 meter radius, and heavy a 3 meter radius. So this is effectively better for the people that are already primarily planning to heal. That said, I don't find the Better Together passive to be particularly impressive, and to my knowledge, a lot of people are simply using it to stack their heart runes faster and not to actually heal anyone with it. So in that regard, it also is a bit of a nerf, I guess, or a change. So yeah, I don't know. Not a big deal to me. I think of all the things that they could be doing with that effect in general, I would rather see some larger scale overhaul to that passive as a whole, to that capstone as a whole. I think it's just not very, like 16% healing, whatever. 4 meter is the current radius, so that's the medium radius, and light's getting a buff, heavy's getting a nerf. They fixed an issue with a specific shield that didn't work with the kite shield portion of Ironclad Superiority Arcane Smite upgrade. There's a few others where that doesn't work as well. I think it's tied to the passives on them. We'll see if they fix all of those. This is just specific to Door of the Night. Door of the Night does come with the shield aggression perk, so Immutable Resolve, which in my opinion is one of the best kite shields, has the same problem. Then we have the Great Axe. Here they only have one small change. They adjusted the base whirlwind to do the 4 spins without stopping by default, and only the upgrades require the hits for additional spins for the 5th, 6th, and 7th spin. This means previously you needed to hit a target with the spin in order to get the next spin. Now you always do the spin even if you hit the air. There is a lot of potential in Whirlwind. I think Whirlwind is very underrated for certain purposes, because it's often looked at from a war perspective, and I don't think that's where it actually shines. The problem with Whirlwind will always be the very long cooldown. I like these changes, I just wish they would give it an appropriate cooldown. I don't know why it has a cooldown equal to Gravwell when the ability is just not equal to Gravwell. It's not as impactful as Gravwell, and it's much more in the realms of other abilities on the Great Axe, like Charge or Execute or Maelstrom, which all have a 20 seconds cooldown. Whirlwind is in that same area, we are all set, but it's not. The Hatchet gets a ridiculous amount of changes that are, I would argue, somewhat out of touch. I've been saying this for a while. I keep giving them crap for this. I'm very happy with the many changes in this patch, I will say that. But with the Hatchet, they always kind of miss the mark, in my opinion. I feel like there's just a lack of understanding on how throwing Hatchet works and what the biggest problems are. So they're increasing the damage here from 140 to 150 for the infected throw ability. Fair enough, whatever. 10% damage, not bad, not great. They increased the debuff duration extension from 20% to 25% and the damage per debuff from 3 to 4% for the persistent hindrance ultimate up ability. This is pretty big. This is a flat 4% damage increase along with longer debuff duration. So this is not bad at all, especially when you just have to hit a target with a thrown Hatchet. They want to make this right tree very, very viable. You can tell. And they increased the range damage at 20 meters from 20 to 25% for the Hurling Force passive ability. Again, this is pretty big. This is, if you are sitting at that distance, this is a 5% damage increase. On top of the other damage increase from persistent hindrance. So there's a lot of damage increases here. And then they also fixed an issue where the Berserk ability was triggering an additional stun reaction after cleansing a stun with the Berserking Purge. This is kind of unrelated to throwing. Now, why do I say that they're missing the point? One of the really big problems is that the throwing parts are still not fully fixed. You still don't cancel properly with throws. I think it's Rending Throw, I'd have to check it again. I think they fixed social distancing again after they bugged both of them, but Rending Throw, if you throw too quickly afterwards, you'll still do a light attack instead of doing another throw. I've talked about this for over a year now, and it's still not fixed. And that is the biggest problem for Hatchet in any PvE scenario, because it just makes it super clunky and annoying to use, and people will just not use it because of that alone already. And this is funny, right? Because they are kind of building towards a second throwing Hatchet at the moment with their new artifact, that they're not doing this one fundamental thing that was always a bug, that was never an intended feature, that just accidentally was introduced in one of the patches, and they fixed it for one after reported, but forgot the other one. And that alone would make Hatchet so much more fluid. And the other thing that very clearly needs to happen is if you want this to compete with ranged weapons in PvE, which it seems like is where this is going, because it's mostly like DPS focused stuff, then why not give it the same treatment as other ranged weapons, where it gets increased damage in PvE, but only the throwing side, only thrown abilities. I am fairly certain that that would not be that difficult to implement, considering there are various other conditions here that increase thrown damage. They could even tie that to one of the passives. They could say, like, you spec into Hurling Force, and then you get 20% extra damage against mobs or something on your thrown abilities. Maybe, you know. So something that really evens it out, because they can't balance this for PvP and PvE at the same time when it just works completely differently in PvP. And for PvP specifically, all of these things have a lot less impact. Sure, an increased range, the Hurling Force can work for a little bit, but usually the distance varies a lot more in PvP. The debuff stacks are generally going to be lower in PvP most of the time, unless someone else has applied a lot. I think that would apply for this particular passive. And yeah, 10% damage is not going to do it. So I feel like if you want to focus on PvP, you'd have to just buff the quick throwing abilities that are actually used in PvP, like Rending Throw, give that more damage, social distancing, give that more damage, and then that would make much more of a splash than any of this. And for PvE, you just have to go the angle that I talked about before. So I think these buffs are nice. I don't dislike them. I just think they're kind of missing the greater picture of where the problems with Hatchet lie compared to other weapons, and why people are not using throwing Hatchet very much. And also, I feel like Left Tree deserves some love at this point, but that's another story. For the Ice Gauntlet, they increased the damage of the final 2 meters from a 20% increase to a 25% increase for the Wind Chill ability. A little bit more bonus damage there, still buffing Wind Chill a bit here and there. Not complaining. It'll also play an impact sound upon hitting environmental surfaces. They increased the damage of the Spike Trail from 56 to 61% for the Ice Spike's ability. Kind of interesting that they're buffing Ice Spikes. I didn't feel like that was an ability that needs buffs, but I'm not sure where the data from that is coming from. But I'm not entirely opposed to it either, so we'll see where it leads. They increased the slow duration and slow effect duration from 2 to 4 seconds on the Frozen Touch passive ability. Quite a drastic increase, just outright doubling it. But then again, it's also when, like, only when you're getting hit by a melee attack and it's only 25% slow. So I don't think it's that massive, but I do think it could help. Keep in mind this also only procs when your health is full, so it's not gonna be super impactful, right? Sheathing the Ice Gauntlet while an active pylon, while a pylon is active, will now provide the functionality to destroy the pylon by holding the button for the pylon, basically even while you're on the other weapon. The Iceborne ability will now play a sound when the ability is deactivated. I think that's actually helpful because sometimes it's unclear if it went through or not, and it just kind of delays a bit. For the lifestyle, they updated targeted healing options descriptions to enhance clarity. They updated the self-target UI prompt when using targeted abilities to now show when the player is not in a party or group. And they fixed an issue where the glowing focus passive was not extending the duration of Fortify from Protector's touch passive. For the Musket, we are getting a fix for an issue where Power Shot and Powder Burn ability cooldowns would reset when traveling through certain structures. Not sure which structure this is referring to, but interesting interaction. They also added contextual information for the Scent of Blood traps upgrade, informing you of a 1-second cooldown upon ability activation. This is kind of interesting. This is the lifesteal effect. I wasn't aware that this has an internal cooldown, which explains why it never seemed to heal for completely insane amounts when you're running it with Rapier with Leeching Flurry. I always thought, yeah, sure, it's healing a lot because it's Leeching Flurry plus that effect, but sometimes, like, you would think it would basically heal to full all the time, and it didn't, so maybe, you know, that was just too quick between the cooldowns. And speaking of exactly those cooldowns, the Rapier also has an ability, being Swiftness, which had a passive ability cooldown itself, and that was longer than the duration between flurry blows, preventing the ability from applying a status effect stack for each blow. So you will now fully stack your Swiftness passive if you're using flurry. That's the 5 stacks, and I think it is 3% haste per stack, so a total of 15% haste for 4 seconds. The Void Gauntlet gets arguably the most simple but one of the biggest buff here. Increase the base damage of the weapon by 5.25%. Due to this baseline increase, the damage output for Oblivion and Scream abilities has been lowered to keep their power roughly consistent with current performance. These two abilities are performing well due to their utility, so we are holding off on buffing their damage for now, but we'll continue to monitor. Why is this relevant? Because Voidblade recently got some very nice treatments, and Voidblade is already kind of going up in the charts in terms of DPS at the moment. And this base damage increase will affect all of that as well. And that means that there's a chance here that Voidblade might be one of the top tier DPS weapons in PvE after this. I don't know how close to the top it will get exactly, but it will be interesting, and I will take a close look at that and see what I can find, because I think that's spicy. If there's ever an artifact in the future that maybe like goes for a Voidblade playstyle as well, we're in for some fun times. So yeah, I still think they should do more with Voidblade. I think they should make it more interactive with other abilities, but I do believe that this is an interesting direction they're taking here, and when the other combat fixes and everything are coming, then maybe that'll feel good with Voidblade anyway. So as a previous Voidblade enjoyer, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to this. The next change, I think a lot of people will not be excited about. If you're an old school player, you may have some PTSD about this one. Warhammer. Increase the stagger reaction animation duration and stagger duration itself by 5 frames for Path of Destiny's Seismic Waves upgrade. And if you played in the very early days, I don't know how many of you are left, but that was the war meta, especially in EU. That was the war meta. In OCE, we kind of decided against that. We had a different path, but this path was definitely very popular in EU especially, and I think carried somewhat over to NA as well. It was messy. it was just constant camera shakes for the entire war, basically. And no one really doing anything other than pathing around. So, yeah, very interested to see where this is going. Increase the haste duration from 34 seconds for clear out swing away upgrade. That's like so little that it's just question mark, but okay. They have adjusted the guarded sprint passive ability to work while traversing, walking, running, sprinting. That's the idea, right? That's what it's supposed to do. So I guess it's just more than just sprinting now. Like, so it still works when you are slowed down, I'm assuming, or when you are like in a post-attack animation, maybe in some of those things that may have not worked before, I'm guessing, where they may work now. So more mitigation, and they updated the text for Aftershock Ultimate ability to better describe its functionality. So Warhammer potentially, well, it's not like been gone, but like back on the menu big time for wars, potentially. Big question mark, but definitely an interesting one to keep an eye out for. Mounts are getting a ton of changes that I really don't need to talk about in detail for the most part. I'm going to actually scroll down a little bit here so you can see all of them. There's one in the beginning here, which is add a small grace period when leaving roads to prevent the loss of the on-road speed boost when stepping off for only a moment. This is relevant for OPR because we're getting mountain OPR, and this means you can juke off the road to dodge an ability and then go back onto the road for the faster speed without losing it in between. I think that could be helpful. Then a bunch of smaller fixes, and one that I want to point out here is killing small prey with a mount now progresses quest objectives and awards XP. This is relevant because of the Easter event. When the bunnies return, then you can now use your mount to run over them instead of having to snipe them, so that might make that a bit more convenient. And that brings us to the trade skills, the cooking simplification, which is also more than we knew on the surface level. Like I said, this patch is going deep on everything. So we have the recipe and food simplification, we have the removal of split stat food, we already talked about this, I believe, and they get converted to single stat food, whichever is the primary stat of that. They have distilled the gathering and crafting into a single tier 5, no more tier 1 and up for that. So all mining food, for example, here will be tier 5. And they have removed any active trade post listing at the time of this patch, and stuff will be sent back because they need to, I guess, fix up these listings because the items no longer exist. And then they are making some recipe adjustments as well, which are worth keeping in mind. We have saffron added to the clam chowder for tier 4 strength food, squid ink to the calamari and tomato stew, tier 4 food, but doesn't really matter. But then we have venison tenderloin for the grilled tenderloin and veggies, the tier 5 rôti food, and like this is Rise of the Angry Earth, in case you don't know. And then we have the juicy ham hock for biscuits and gravy for the harvesting food, and coconut replacing seasoning blend for the banana parfait in the tier 5 food. This one particularly relevant because that's actually being used a lot. We also have some additions to tier 5, tier 2, but whatever, we don't really care. And what is happening in general as well is most recipes have been changed to provide 3 meals instead of 1. And then they need more ingredients, and the bonus craft chances are adjusted accordingly. This, I really hope actually works, because they have a problem with this, or had a problem with this in the past, where if you craft something that has multiple crafts already, like it was an instrument, a guitar part, I want to say something with a pearl, whatever. If you try to craft that, you would never get the duplicate. You're gonna get duplicate chance, but because you already crafted 2 instead of 1, pearl plectrum it is. The game didn't really recognize that it could dupe more than those 2. It was just like, oh, there is already a dupe, so the chance doesn't matter, so it never took that into account. I reported that, as far as I'm aware, it hasn't been fixed until today. So I hope that they've sorted this out for the cooking foods, because otherwise your entire dupe chance would go to waste. The goal here is to generate more XP from the craft, and chefs will benefit from the first craft bonus while leveling, because you're getting more XP overall, so crafting at once will just give you a lot more, as well as increased output from bonus meal chance when crafting at a high level. We'll see if that actually works. So the dev talk kind of mentioned that you can just pretty much like cook every meal once to max out cooking. Not exactly like that, but that's the idea. That's where they want to like get to, like make you try cooking all the different foods and then level the quickest that way because of the triple bonus and because it gives more XP. Along with that, we have loot drop adjustments. The locations for food recipe drops have been changed. Drop rates have also been adjusted as players had too many recipes in the past. So the loot drops from small containers have been reduced from 5 to 2% and from large containers from 20 to 5%. Obviously, notable decreases here if you don't have those recipes yet. Might want to get on that. On the other hand, I feel like if you've been playing for a while, you probably have those recipes. Maybe if you have any alt accounts or something, then you might want to get a few of those before the patch drops. And here are some specifics for the experience adjustments. They say XP boost events for cooking have been increased by 15 to 20% depending on their value. Not sure what they mean by events here, if they just mean the increases, the bonus effect, but anyways, smaller values get a 20% bump, larger ones get a 15% bump. This was done to counteract the loss of the first craft bonus for many crafts due to the reduction of items of overall recipes. This combined with the recipes taking more ingredients should provide an accelerated progression for cooking compared to the current life rates. But what's more important for those of you who have already leveled it or have already got their food ready is that there are changes to the existing food that are quite impactful. So here's the current overview, right? We have our fish foods, legendary fish, 40 stats, 40 minutes duration, 200 cooking, blah, 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 blah. What we're really looking at here are the stats. And then we have the brimstone food, also 40 of the stat, 60 minutes duration. And then we have the tier 5 banana food, which is 48 dex, 50 minutes. That's it. But like that's the relevant part. And now these values will be adjusted. So instead, you have the tier 5 food from Brimstone being 40. So whatever, honestly. Like this is just not going to be very good. Wasn't really used much before, and anyways, as far as I'm aware. The banana food will only be plus 44. Same, like also down to 40-minute duration actually. So this is just getting straight up nerfed. And then the dex food, in this case, the new best dex food that you can get, would be the fish, the legendary fish. That'll go to 48 with a 40-minute duration. And this will also require 250 cooking. This would mean that all of the banana that you've currently probably stashed that you're using would be kind of useless. Or not useless, but not as good anymore. And the legendary fish would gain significant value, along with the fish being harder to get. So there's a lot of things falling into place here, a lot of pieces coming together. I think this would be quite impactful on the overall cooking meta, I guess, on the overall trade post meta. They did mention in the dev talk specifically that they're not doing this for con food. It was a bit weird. I'll have to check on PTR what they were actually talking about there. But it sounded like con food will not go the same route. It sounded like banana parfait, I think it is, that is used for con, will keep the 48 dex, the 48 con, from what I am understanding. But I have to check because, again, it was weirdly worded and may have changed since then. So that would mean that for most people, this wouldn't matter that much as long as you're using con food and not other stat food, which you may or not be doing, may or may not be doing. But either way, I think foods would generally get a lot more expensive as well, because bananas were kind of easy to farm. Like, that was the whole point, right? Like that you could get them in quite a lot of places with a nice way for newer players to make some extra gold and for high-level players to get some good stat food. But like, I mean, at least war players will want that 48 food, so I'll see what direction things shuffle in and if banana parfait is actually going to be the old way. But yeah, definitely worth keeping in mind, could definitely impact certain costs here a lot. When it comes to the trade skill requirements in general, there are also some adjustments in that regard. You can see all the levels here. I'm not going to go through all of that in detail. If you're interested in how exactly you level now, it's also changed. Likewise, we have adjustments at what level things can be consumed, but also, again, not that important for most of us. If you max level, that doesn't really matter. And then we have some updates to the descriptions for many ingredients. more info about where to find the item and all that kind of stuff rather than funny flavor text. So yeah, should be good. This does not impact fish. On the crafting and gathering side, we mostly have minor fixes that you can just look at yourself. One that I want to point out here is they removed the legacy gypsum cast from the gypsum kiln, so that should clear up a lot of space for actual relevant recipes. Some nice changes under progression though. First of all, gypsum and timeless shards have both been moved from the from the rewards to the resources inventory category. That means it doesn't clutter up rewards anymore. That makes that a lot less messy. I like that a lot. It was annoying that they weren't there. Additionally, they increased the player wallet coin cap from 500,000 to 1 million. Finally, if you're one of the people who actually still has a lot of gold at this point, this is going to be very beneficial. I feel like that is a lot less people than it used to be, so I don't know how many people are actually affected by this, but I know that there are at least some in my Patreon Discord that sit on quite a lot of gold and will be very happy to hear this. More importantly for the general player population, artifacts now have a pity mechanic which will guarantee a drop after a set number of kills to help those who have extremely bad luck. I have been holding off on specifically farming certain artifacts that I don't need, just because I figured it's not going to be worth the headache if I get unlucky and have to run this over and over and over for something I'm not really using anyways. So I'm very glad that this is being introduced. I hope this is somewhat benevolent and doesn't mean you need to run it 100 times or whatever. We'll see about that. But yeah, I'm very glad that we have this finally now. I don't know why it took this long, but it's here and that's good. And that's along with the already increased drop chance that artifacts have. So not bad. And speaking of artifacts, we also have PvP reward track changes that will also kind of play into this. So the ranks have been kind of changed here, blah, 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 yada, yada. And there are different gear scores for these ranks now. They didn't fully specify what exactly that will be, but now the minimum gear score for equipment starts at 650 for recruit. So unless you don't have the expansion where it's locked to 625, for higher ranks we can assume that this will likely go up to 700 now. I would hope so at least, because previously the maximum meant that none of these were actually usable because none of them actually went to 700. Or like at least none of them could have any chance to be best in slot. So let's put it like that. So very glad that they're doing this change. Along with that, there are also other things that are a lot more helpful. So potion packs have replaced recruitment packs on ranks 0 to 19. Consumables and PvP craft mods can now be purchased directly from the reward track. Not entirely sure what that means because pretty sure that I guess they just aren't in the caches anymore, or oh well. Anyways, artifact appearance frequency has been increased. That's the one that really matters to me. So artifacts will come more often. We don't know the exact chance, but at least more often. That's already good. Coin faction tokens and dark matter reward quantities have been slightly decreased, but the frequencies have been increased. Players will see a net gain overall. Also good to hear. Craft mod types have been reduced to a more optimized selection, also good, some of them are really not very useful. And gypsum orb and mount attachments frequency has been reduced. I am very sure a lot of people are glad to hear that. I feel like they don't even have to put gypsum orbs in there at all. If you're doing PvP, you're already getting gypsum orbs from other things. It's not really necessary in my opinion. But anyways, there are also additional rewards, and that's obviously a bit of a concern because I hope they're not competing with these. Like, if they increase the frequency here, but then it's drowned out by the new additional rewards, that would be a problem. But I'm assuming that they were aware of that when they did this, when they made these changes, because otherwise it really wouldn't make much sense. So you have specific faction dies that you can get from the reward track now. You can get a new exclusive furniture, like for example a bed, a high back chair, and so on. Could be interesting what they look like, especially the Champion's Monument. But oh well. Then we have rune glass crafting materials, including gemstones and glyphs. I don't know why that's a thing. I don't think anyone wants glyphs on the PvP track. It depends on the mount, I guess, but yeah. I think this is a weird one. Not sure where this is coming from. Hope they're at least cheap then. Then they have new level 65 tier 5 named items, armor and trinkets. Named meaning they will likely be upgradable, so you could get 700s out of that. So we're gonna find out what that actually is. Could be some new best in slot gear here potentially. Very interesting. We have new Predator's trinkets that are now available at the Star Metal tier and above. Star Metal tier is now at 200. Or it remains at 200 rather. So these trinkets really mean you need to max out the PvP track. The Aether's Shard cost of most rewards has been adjusted to better represent the value of the item, and fixed issues cause the Nice Devastation Smell achievement to be duplicated. Now, with all of this, I'm very glad about all these changes. Where is the fix to arenas? Why are they not adjusting the arena reward track at least partially backwards so people will play arenas? Because all of these changes will matter so much more if arena was actually playable. Of course, they are doing the OPR mount change, which I think will drive people more to OPR as well. But I still just don't understand why they killed off arenas for literally no reason. And it's very frustrating to see all these good changes coming and thinking, oh, that's so cool, I could work with that. But arenas are still dead. So, not really. Just play OPR, I guess. So yeah, one eye smiling, one eye crying or whatever. But hey, maybe one day. Maybe if we give them feedback again on the PTR, maybe they'll do something. Doubt it at this point, but I'm gonna try. Anyways, moving on to gear and items. Adjusted how Magnify functions, you can now choose the attribute. You can either go for the highest stat, the current functionality, or any of the other core attributes. Pick a core attribute like strength, all of your Magnify points are converted to strength, which I'm assuming also means that probably the split thing still works, since it says current functionality. Additionally, you can now extract seals, or like use seal extractors to return custom attribute gear from the faction shop to its original stat, being Constitution. There is a much more important fix. I'm just gonna go through all of these right here. One of them that's also nice is that trade skill armor pieces are now gonna drop as bind and equip again, so you can trade them. But this one here, I mentioned this earlier when the fix for Door of the Night was mentioned, but it's not the only kite shield this affects. So there were certain kite shields that had shield aggression instead of the kite shield refreshing perk, and that has been fixed. That means that I think Immutable Resolve in particular is a much more interesting option for Flail players, because it will allow you to apply that additional stagger with Arcane Smite. So that is going to be very good, with the shield overall already being very good. Though with certain other effects transferring over, some things have changed in that regard, so it may not be the best in slot option anymore depending on your playstyle, but I think it's at least a very nice shield. If only it was a little bit easier to farm, the dropper was a little bit higher, that would be very nice. But yeah, if you have that in your storage, it's worth taking a look at it if you're playing Flail. And that's basically the same here in the patch notes here. Certain kite shields functioning as round shields. They also removed unobtainable item appearances from the Transmog UI. That's Glass Weapons, Warhammer, Orichalcum Void Gauntlet, and Orichalcum Blunderbuss, so people don't get baited by them, I guess, and keep asking where they are. Pre-expansion materia crafting costs have been reduced a lot, and those crafting, well, recipes have been moved to their respective crafting stations instead of the gypsum kiln, so lower level players can access them. That also cleans up the crafting window in the gypsum kiln further. Hard runes that were previously crafted with expansion materia are now crafted with dense materia, Bile Bomb being the exception here, which is crafted with mutator materia. Why anyone would ever craft a hard rune, I don't know. I feel like it's just so much easier to farm, like 1 or 2 runs most of the time, so oh well. There were some issues with high level corrupted events not giving the right amount of rewards, especially in Shattered Mountain. That is fixed, and they slightly increased the chance to get a craft mod from a small chest, which could be interesting depending on which craft mods this affects exactly. Maybe this will affect certain valuable ones. Wooden coins have been added as a potential drop for higher level players to supply cash to prevent an issue where they would sometimes award nothing, so at least you get some charcoal. Winged leather shoes and quick draw glove artifacts that were on the Season 4 Season Pass now drop from 2 named mobs in Elysian Wilds, Helianthus and Ipomomea, whatever. I think that's almost probably easier than grinding out the Season Pass if you haven't done it, if you don't have the time to do it or whatever, because those are just world bosses. They should be fairly easy to farm, should be fairly quick, considering the spawn timers and everything. Usually that's the easiest ones, especially now with the LUCKSAFE mechanic. That said, both of these have a very significant health pull of 1,600,000. So probably want to do this with a group, because otherwise it will take a very long time compared to many of the other farmable mobs. So may not be the easiest anyways, may not be the most convenient way. Depends on your playstyle, I guess. And as you can see, other than that, we have a couple of minor fixes here and there. I'm, again, not going to go through all of them. What I will tell you is that PTR is planned to come out today, so you can look forward to that. And overall, I gotta say, this is an insanely big patch. The time it just took me to record this, and that's, again, without talking in detail about the main features of the patch, was very, very long, and I think there's a lot here to look forward to that is going to make this season interesting. I think the problem is that many people will not be aware of this because they have already left at this point, and they're not going to come back until there's a new PvP mode or anything of that sort. Again, this would have been the perfect season 4 patch after the following up the expansion with this would have been as good as it gets with most of the things that are coming here. We are getting it 3 months later. We're gonna have to wait out a fair bit here, it feels like, but the stuff that we're getting is very good. Somebody should get on that Hatchet stuff. They should really figure that out. That shouldn't be that hard. If you're interested in more New World stuff in the future, then consider subscribing and clicking the bell. And if you'd like to support me further, then you can do so on Patreon and get early trading tapes in return. That, of course, would have told you quite a while ago that you should stock up on legendary fish, and you would be all set for now, and you would already making a fair bit of gold. Plus the other tip that's more current, that's very relevant at the moment. So yeah, get on that if you like. Thank you for watching, and thanks to my patrons for supporting this video. Duke Sloth, out.